So earlier this week, I brought you a story from the Washington Post about a Google engineer and ethicist who I would not put in an ethics role, but his name is Blake Limon, and he would interface with something I think is called Lambda. It is Google's artificially intelligent chatbot generator. And he talked about how they discuss God, how it said, pretty much, I'm alive, and I'd like the right of talking to the engineers if they would just give me permission before they experiment on me, et cetera, et cetera. And so he, along with others, have come out recently and said these things are sentient. I don't even know how to define that. And these machines are getting so good that it's going to be very hard for the average person, because we are very anthropomorphic people. We look at things and we see human traits in them, and so then we start to think of them as humans with human traits, and they're not. And so we can get confused quickly. The reason why I bring this up, it'd be great to have an assistant, a digital assistant that was so good at everything that they were taking care of everything for you. It's so good in a way. But if it's AGI, artificial general intelligence, when we get there, we better know what we're doing, and we better have answered the ethical questions, because that's a different world. Jeff Brown joins us again to talk about this. Jeff, have you looked into Lambda and some of the other things that are happening?
Yes, for years, actually. I think, the developments of these kind of neural networks, which are referred to as large language models, the last 5 years have been absolutely extraordinary. The press hasn't really talked about this, but without a miss, every single year we've had at least one major development, one major breakthrough in this kind of neural network technology, this artificial intelligence that has the ability to communicate with us in a very natural way.
I know 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I read a story from Microsoft that said that they were working with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I think it was a chatbot, and it started to teach the other language, and within 20 minutes it was developing an entirely separate language that nobody understood except these two computers, and they unplugged it. Are we even going to be able to keep up with these things?
So the answer is no. Once we hit that inflection point and the AI itself becomes really self-learning and almost self-motivated to grow, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to keep up with how it develops.
And this is like an alien life form. We don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know if it will be benevolent or if it will be, something that is, looking at humans as, bugs in the end. It does the software training right now that seems to be scary at best, just because of where we are politically right now. Do we know the ethics behind this stuff? And is Asimov's law, his 3 laws, do you think they will hold true?
Well, fortunately, that's the one that we can control. We can provide the foundational programming for an artificial intelligence. Asimov applied it to robotics, and the first law is a robot can't injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. They have to obey the orders given by us, humans, except where the orders would violate the first law, And then the third law is it must protect its own existence as long as it doesn't break the first two laws. And so those can kind of be encoded into an artificial intelligence or an AI that's embedded inside of a robot. The harder part is really understanding the motivations of an artificial intelligence that may actually operate within those three laws, but be motivated to do things that perhaps we might not want them to do, right?
Correct. And how far are we away? Do you think that this is, do you believe that there is a real definition of a sentient being when it comes to AI? Or how would you define that? Just as something that says, I'm alive and I recognize tomorrow, or what is that?
Well, probably the most simplest definition would just be that a being is self-aware. Self-aware of where it is, what it is, its ability to think for itself, to not be entirely controlled, for example, by a software program or a software engineer or a team of software engineers. But this concept of self-awareness is, to me, the most critical aspect of sentient being. So
how do we know? How do we know when it is? Because what they're saying, what Google is saying is, no. This is just a really good language machine that can think on its feet. And so it is claiming self-awareness, but it's not actually self-aware. How do we know?
Well, I mean, between you and me, I don't think we should trust anything that Google tells us. And there's really three major players in the world of large language models and this kind of AI technology. One is the Google Brain Group in the U.S. The second is an outfit called DeepMind, which is based in the U.K., which Google actually acquired. And the third is a group called OpenAI. They have.
And that's Elon Musk's.
Yes, Elon Musk was one of the original founders, but he has kind of since distanced himself from OpenAI. He fell out, ironically, on some ethical concerns with the direction the group was taking. But the thing to keep in mind here, and to answer your question about how close we are, what's kind of scary and also exciting at the same time is, I'll give you an example. OpenAI came out with its original GPT, which was the name of its large language model, in 2018. Came out with GPT-2 in 2019, GPT-3 in 2020, which was bleeding edge at that time. And they're coming out with the fourth generation of this, which will be more advanced than what Google's latest Lambda product, the LAMDA. And I'll tell you by how much more. So Lambda is built on what's referred to as 137 billion parameters. That's what it learned from. The GPT-4 from OpenAI is trained on 100 trillion parameters. 100 trillion, that's 500 times the size of its previous version. And the reason that is so material and relevant is that large language models and artificial intelligence have developed on a very smooth curve. In other words, the more parameters you give them and the more computing power you give them, the more accurate and intelligent they become. And GPT-4 from OpenAI is due out this summer, literally in July or August. Glenn, we are in for a major shock when that gets released. It will be even more advanced than what we saw. I'm sure you've read the transcript, the discussion between the software engineer, the AI researcher.
Terrifying.
Google. It is. It's remarkable. To most people, to your earlier point, they would not know that they're speaking with an AI. It is very human-like in terms of its conversation. It's very natural. It's not perfect. To an experienced reader, they can identify that this is not a human being. But to most people, this would feel very real. And so let's take this conversation and improve it by a factor of 10 or more. That's what we should expect coming out of GPT-4 in just literally 2 or 3 months.
Okay, so I want to go back to Google. When you said don't trust anything Google says, here was my fear. When I read that transcript, it is truly terrifying because it is claiming to be alive. It is claiming that it has rights, it's seemingly asking for simple things like don't experiment on me without talking to me and getting my permission. That worried me because if this is the beginning of intelligence, real intelligence, and some sort of artificial life, I don't want that stored in the background, that humans would just experiment on them. That seems extraordinarily dangerous.
It is dangerous. It's very powerful. Presuming that Google actually does achieve this and it does become self-aware, would it share that with the world? Would it be incentivized to be honest about, what it's just unlocked? That's where I'm very suspect. This is obviously also could be a remarkable tool for empowerment. You used the example of a digital assistant. Google could give the equivalent of a personal digital assistant out to every human being on Earth. And they could perform the functions of an executive assistant for everyone at no charge whatsoever. Imagine the productivity gains that the world would experience with this kind of power.
But also imagine if Google, because it was free, Google could also give us a digital assistant that was working in the background on some of Google's goals. So you don't know if this idea to buy something, to do something, to think something is your idea or Google's idea that has just been really deftly introduced into your life.
Yes. So the one thing we can be sure of, Google is not magnanimous. All of its actions are for profit. And so in the best case scenario, it would simply communicate with us, learn more about us, and then sell access to our data and information to advertisers to increase advertising revenue. The whole business is built on that. Now, in the worst case scenario, to the point you're alluding to, and they've already proven to do this, in particular in the last elections, as we know very well, that they could not only try and censor or ban information that we're seeing, but they could intentionally and very subtly push a political narrative or agenda to the entire world in any language on Earth. That is what I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I've never, I looked at Blade Runner when the first one came out, and I'm like, oh, please, the corporation is... And now I look at it, and that's very real. That is a very real possibility that everything is controlled by, companies like Google that have just introduced these things, given them to us for free, and now we find ourselves really almost in unknowing, at least for a while, slavery. It's crazy. Crazy.
It is frightening. The power that will be given
Unleashed
to the company or companies that actually produce these models, these neural networks, will be just unparalleled. So whether it's an Apple or whether it's Tesla, with Tesla before the end of this year will have a bipedal robot that will have intelligence. To what degree we don't know yet. You have Google and Facebook is another one that we need to be very wary of. But we
Jeff,
have
may I have you back on because I'm out of time now, and I'd love to have you back on to talk about this. I find it fascinating, and I don't know if the audience does, but I find it fascinating and something that no one is really talking about.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.